I'd like to start with a quote from Joan Chittister, who is a Benedictine nun. "It is not perfection that leads us to God, it is perseverance." Prayer, justice, and faith. In today's selection from Luke, these three themes are presented for us to consider. How are they connected, and what do they mean for us today as followers of Jesus? In Catholic school, we heard a lot about prayer. We learned the 4 different types of prayer: adoration, contrition, thanksgiving, and supplication, abbreviated as ACTS. Easy to remember for tests, as religion was an academic subject. We prayed at the start of the school day and at the close of the school day, looking at the crucifix that hung above the blackboard in front of each classroom. We stopped on the playground at the sound of the noon bell and prayed the Angelus. The angel of the Lord declared unto Mary, and she conceived of the Holy Spirit. And we attended First Friday Mass as part of the school day each month. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, we had air raid drills in which we crawled under our desks and prayed the Rosary, which was led by the nun who was your teacher. I never understood how a desk and a rosary would save me from an atomic bomb. But we were taught that faith was believing in things that rationally made no sense. So, in the gospel selection for today, we hear about the importance of prayer and not losing heart. We are to be persistent in our prayer, knowing that God is always listening and wants good things for us. As a child, I learned rote prayers, prayers that came from the myriad of prayer books that were accumulated to mark reception of the different sacraments: baptism, First Communion, confirmation, and transitions such as graduations. It was not until I became involved with Al-Anon in my late 20s as the result of a relationship breakup that I began to see prayer as less rote and more personal. In those rooms, my vision of God moved from a judgmental, stern authority figure to a loving, merciful being that listens and wants good things for me. Coming to believe in a living, caring God, prayer then became a dialogue rather than a sort of Christmas wish list of wants and needs and rationalizations for misdeeds. The loneliness and fear that accompanied my growing awareness of my sexual orientation was replaced with a sense of acceptance and love as I came to believe the message of Psalm 139. I will praise you because I have been fearfully and wonderfully made. Fearfully, when translated from the Hebrew, means with great reverence, heartfelt interest, and with respect. Wonderfully, when translated from the Hebrew, means unique and set apart. Now I pray so that I may connect with my God who loves me unconditionally and never abandons me regardless of my screw-ups or missteps. I now know the God of love rather than the God of law of my youth. But there seems to be another theme in this selection as well. What is the story of the persistent widow about? If we consider the status of the persistent widow in the context of her time, perhaps we also hear a call to work for justice. And what do prayer, persistence, and justice have to do with faith? As this parable ends with the question, and yet, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? Once again, Luke's gospel has us asking what Jesus' message is in this parable. Luke's gospel contains several parables about widows and their encounters with Jesus. In all these stories, the widows may be characterized as among the vulnerable people that Jesus shows a particular interest in serving. But widows in Luke's gospel also provide a prophetic role and are active and faithful witnesses. Early in Luke's gospel, we meet Anna, the prophet who spreads the news of the birth of Jesus. We hear about Jesus raising the only son of the widow of Nain. And we have the poor widow who gives her last coins in the temple, a model of faithful generosity. And today we have the persistent widow, a force to be reckoned with. While the widow's relentless petitioning finally moves the judge to grant her petition, we are left pondering the judge's action, depending on the translation that is used. Is his decision less about justice and more about his social status and wanting to save face in the community? One translation suggests that the judge granted the petition because the widow was giving him, quote, a black eye in the community. In the interaction between the widow and the judge, there is a strong message about tenacity and strength when dealing with disinterested and arbitrary power. The widow relentlessly pursues justice, again putting this parable in the context of its time in which widows were thoroughly marginalized in a patriarchal society and seen as charity cases. Jesus presents the widow as hardly helpless. Rather, she is presented as someone not afraid to challenge the power and authority of the judge. Jesus reinforces the message of the Hebrew Scriptures, which calls upon judges to provide justice and only justice, and what it meant to live ethically in relation to God, each other, and especially those considered to be vulnerable. In this parable that is full of interesting contrasts, we hear Jesus' message that justice is central to our relationship with God, and that living a prayerful life equips us for the work of pursuing justice. Today's selection concludes with a rather haunting question. And yet, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? If Jesus came today, would he find followers who are moved by our relationship with him and the message of the Gospels? Today's selection makes a connection among prayer, justice, and faith. The three themes are related. Prayer gives us strength to work for justice and promotes a stronger relation with God, which deepens our faith. Prayer is the means by which we demonstrate our love for, hope in, and faith in a God who we know listens and acts in this world with mercy and justice for all of God's people. Prayer, intimate communication with God, gives hope to work for justice in this world. Lutheran pastor Francisco Garcia makes a connection between prayer and Christian mysticism when he describes prayer as, quote, a way of finding communion with God. Social philosopher and theologian Dorothea Soel suggests that prayer leads less to a new vision of God than a different relationship to the world. Quote, one that borrowed the eyes of God. That different relationship allows us to pray and to see the world with eyes wide open and thus fully aware of the injustices around us and more connected in solidarity with those people who are on the margins. It calls us to embody prayer with action. In our current political climate, prayer has become a somewhat trite response to horrific incidences such as mass shootings that require legislative action rather than a quick soundbite, quote, our thoughts and prayers are with the victims and their families. But as followers of the Christ, hopefully we have a different understanding of prayer and what it means and can do in response to violence and injustice. Authentic prayer, deep, intimate communication with our God, we know is faith in action. This is the message of today's gospel. Like the persistent widow who didn't give up, and your ever-present God who never stops listening, we continue to pray for strength to work for justice and to enact the reign of God. With prayer and action, we work for a more just world that reflects the God of mercy, love, and justice that we know through our prayer. Amen.